and salutations. It is I, the anti-woke Jamaican gamehead. And apparently that combination, YouTube thinks, is very dangerous to their community. In this highly dangerous video, we'll be looking at the games industry. One company right now, Capcom, ramping up the marketing and the PR in order to normalize games costing $70 and possibly above. Now, Dragon's Dogma 2 was announced as being $70. The downside of this is Monster Hunter Wilds more than likely will be $70 plus. Now, that inherently isn't bad, but we're going to go through some of the points that the Capcom representative is making here as to why the game's price should be increased. This comes from IGN. So this Capcom rep, Haru, for someone who likes anime as much as I do, I'm horrible at Japanese.
Yes.
Haruhiro Sugimoto. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sugimoto, yes. So he's saying that increasing the price of video games would be a healthy option for the industry. And he justified this by saying that development costs are 100 times higher than during the Famicom era, but the prices haven't increased that much. And also that wages need to increase. And that sounds reasonable. He did slightly go away from a reasonable approach when he then said that an economic slump doesn't prevent people from purchasing pricier games or pricier products. It doesn't prevent some people, but once there's a recession, what do you call it? Like recreational spending, there's a term for it that slips me right now, but recreational spending goes all the way down for across the board for many. So some industries are hit harder than others, but don't think that you're immune to it. Yes, it's true that game development costs have increased disproportionately to the increase of the product. However, I would argue that this is more a problem or more indicative of poor budgeting. You're focusing on the wrong thing. To be fair, it's not only the companies alone, because for years now I've been saying that we as gamers, you see, back in my day, we used to have a term for gamers who prioritized heavily on graphics. It was mainly the PC crowd, and for consoles, that mentality came over when the Xbox came out, the original one, because that was significantly more powerful than the PS2. We call those people who focus so heavily on graphics wars. It was a derogatory term used to criticize and blast that type of narrow-minded behavior, because it's a game, it's not a painting. Visuals are important, yes, but they're not the end-all be-all. And this is one of the reasons why from the PS3 era onwards I jumped over to PC, and I just haven't really been playing games that often, because from the PS3 era I realized that most of these games are just HD upscaled version of PS2 games. Everything is a Devil May Cry or a God of War, or it's just the same game that I've already been playing from the PS2 and in some cases the PS1. So from the PS3 I saw that this was a problem. But many reviewers, because YouTube wasn't that big at the time, so they didn't have influencers, so to speak, but you had the IGN and so on in the world, and they were still all in on the graphics. Then later on, when YouTube became more popular and videos were easily shared, influencers now also started to join the bandwagon. One in particular in Jamaica, we would say, bound me. That's Digital Foundry, because initially, when that mentality wasn't that pervasive, the graphics wars, Digital Foundry was alright, a nice little niche thing. You can look at the technicalities of GPUs and the graphics technologies and so on, alright, fine. But as the graphic wars grew in number, Digital Foundry became a poison, because it started to shift the discussion more away from the games as product and just as a tech demo, a tech piece, a showcase, and one that Nvidia smartly, but for us, smartly leaned into heavily in the past few years. Digital Foundry have hyped up a bunch of games, the most recent one being Forza Motorsport, and they hyped it up because it was technologically grandiose. The game is broken. And on a side note, they also started shift the focus away from important things, because Forza Horizon and Motorsport both have absurd accessibility options to the point where the game can play itself and people are praising that as a good thing. Tell me something. If you make a game that is poor, but everyone can play it, all that does is ensure that more people can play your mediocre game versus how things used to be, where you make a good game and ensure, okay, well, not really ensure, but if you didn't have the money or the expertise in order to make it accessible to everyone, then those who could play it had a very good experience. I think the old way is better. It's better you have a great game that most people can play rather than a mediocre game or bad game that everyone can play. But no, we want to focus on colorblind mode and blind mode and deaf mode and reading problem and everything apart from your blasted game. Make the game fun. If you ask older people who've been around 30 years or so on in gaming, you will often hear us say that games are getting worse. And that is despite the industry growing year on year. Some people will say that the increased profitability of the industry proves that we are wrong and gaming is better than ever. That's a fallacy. I can simply use point to one movie franchise, well, two movie franchises off the top of their head that disproves that line of thinking. Transformers and Fast and the Furious. They make a lot of money, but I don't think anyone, even those who like the franchises, will say that these are the pinnacle of cinema. So just because something makes a lot of money does not mean that it's good. I have never experienced a game that I look back and I say, you know what? If only this game required me to buy a $1,000 GPU to render it at 720p and then fake it to 1080p and then fake the frame rate to 60 FPS. If only that game had those requirements, it would be a better game, or I would enjoy the game more. Not once. So for what purpose are we really building, well, not we, for what purpose are the technology giants really building these quote unquote features? It's not for us, because this has never, they are addressing a problem that never existed. So even before wokeism, I think wokeism is a whole other issue, because just by injecting wokeism, the quality of a game would drop massively. But before even that, the industry was already knee deep in its own problem as far as the quality of games are concerned. So the quality of the games are way down. You don't have any games that are as creative or innovative anymore, and they're all built with just exploitative psychological traps. Everything is a game as service or a live service, and you have day one update and DLC and microtransaction and all these things. And if this guy Sujimoto, he's saying that you want to increase the price of the game to $70, does this mean that you won't have any more DLC or season pass or battle pass or microtransaction in the game? Highly doubt it. You will still have the additional monetization, the exploitative monetization, and the price of the game just increase. And the games are buggier than ever. They are simply not done when they are on release. So now the question becomes, what exactly are you spending the budget on to have these bloated development costs? Is it because you want to have a 4K blades of grass? Well, render it at 720p and make it stylized, so that way 5 years later you won't look at the game and say, boy, this realistic thing looking funky, you know. You say, no, it still looks good. Guilty Gear Xrd is a good example of a game that's quite old, but because they went with a stylized, very, very stylized art style, it holds up. King of Fighters 15 as well. It went more stylized than King of Fighters 14, and even though it's old and even though it's not technologically great or amazing, it's a pleasant enough game to look at. But aesthetics and environment is when you have the problem, because now you have the other issue of them making the models damn ugly. Well, correction, they're making female characters ugly. Look, there's a reason why male Mr. Universe or whatever male pageants aren't really that popular now, because man ugly, woman look good. So when you make the female characters look like a man, what are you going up with? You're going up with some ugly character, and nobody want to see no ugly brother. So why on earth would I pay even more money for a broken game with many features cut out of the game to resell to me later on, and have a bunch of ugly looking characters in it. Having on top of all of that, you go sprinkle in some left-wing propaganda. That is not a company package at all. So even if the development costs are being properly invested into the game and not on alphabet consultants and feminist consultants and all kind of weird nonsense, you do know of the ask, what is the size of the market? Alright, so he mentioned the Famicom era, so that's back in the 80s. Alright, so let's see. There was mostly arcades back then, and the arcade video game industry was just under $3 billion in 1980. The next year, that increased to $5 billion, or this nice that they adjusted for inflation here, $16 billion in 2022. So back in the 1980s, the video game, the arcade industry was generating $16 billion in revenue. So in the 1990s, the video game industry, and this is when consoles were starting to overtake the arcades, the video game industry generated $40 billion. It's true, as he was saying, that the price of games didn't increase massively. So what this meant was more games were being bought, and that could either be because people have slightly more disposable income, because this is a 10-year gap now. So those who were in their teens in the 80s, young adults in the 90s, and people weren't going to university, like it wasn't a clear thing that you have to go to university. You were often get a high school diploma and then go out and work. So you would have a bit of disposable income. So it was either that people were buying more games or more people were buying games. Right? But whatever the case may be, there's more money being generated in the industry. So there's more opportunity for companies to make money. $40 billion in the 1990s. This is up from $20 billion $16 billion in the 80s. Right? So we're coming from $16 billion. Let's look at the 2020s now. Let's see what the video game industry is worth here. Over $179 billion in global revenue. This means that the industry has increased the revenue more than 10 times. So here's what I say. You shouldn't need to increase your budget 100 times over to make a decent game. And as a matter of fact, many games prove exactly that. Nintendo is known for not going overboard with their budget, and you have other games from small studios that get the job done and people really like it. You don't need $300 million budget games, $200 million budget games, and for what? After doing something for 20 years, it becomes boring. So now you want to do the same thing that you've been doing in PS2, only this and the sunlight looks a little bit more realistic, and the grass moves a little bit more realistic, and the shadows look a little bit sharper. That's not worth it. That's not worth it. So if you want to raise the price of games to $70, those games need to be worth $70. And that is one of the biggest issues I have right now. They're focused on the graphics of the game. And companies like Digital Foundry and IGN, they salivate on the graphics. And many YouTubers as well. They push the graphical front. And the game is crap. Because you see, the graphical thing, I believe that we are now reaching that plateau. From the PS2 era, I think, people were saying that we're going to reach a plateau in graphics when it comes to games. That you would need a lot of graphical power in order to have a very minor improvement visually for the game. And I think that's where we are now. Because many of these games coming out require unholy amount of processing power. And the improvement of the visuals do not match with the power requirements. And even if by some miracle or some rare case it does, I haven't seen any, but let us say that it does, the gameplay is bad because you focus all your energy on 4K leaves. Anyway, that's just my thought on the issue. If you come across this video and YouTube hasn't silenced me to head on back yet for not supporting them funny man business, let me know what you think about raising the price of video games to $70 US and above, and the arguments that Sujimoto made, and as my own as well, regarding this whole issue.